Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Debbie Forster. I am the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter, and I'm really grateful that you've joined us for our drop-in sessions. So those of you who are new to this session, this is actually the second time we've done this in this new format. And the goal here is, if you've been at the Tech Talent Charter, that there are a range of activities that we have, from our festival, which if you haven't had a chance to look, if you weren't able to attend our festival, recordings are on there. Our biggest, most formal festival to hear from panels about best practice, to our working lunches, which are big panel discussions where companies come and share what's happening. What we wanted, which was something that we used to be able to do back when we were smaller, which was to get a group of us together to talk about what's happening, to be able to let you know what's happening on the charter, what's coming up, but then more importantly, for all of you to be able to talk about topics that matter to you. And where we've evolved this with Karen's great idea was, rather than just do that ad hoc, just hope that somebody has something interesting, is to hear and listen to all of you about, one, questions that you have, and two, things that you're working on. So these sort of sessions, which we are going to have monthly, are going to be a work in progress session. So when we have people talking here, and I don't just mean my two people that we're going to be talking to first, I want everyone to feel that you can weigh in. This is where we're going to be talking about topics that we're working on. These are works in progress. So we can talk about, this is working really well, this hasn't worked, we're not sure, and here's the big question area. So this is a session where you can come along to hear how companies of all sizes are talking about the full range. So as we're talking, if you feel like you have something to share, something that you're doing, please put that in the chat and we will draw you in later. What was super in our last session was we had two people from Global talking about a topic, but then we found that there were two or three other people in the discussion who are also working on the same area, and the super discussion came through. So we hope that we'll do that. And then if you ever have to miss a session, of course, that would be horribly disappointing. So we will be recording these so you can dip back in. So if you're puzzled on what we talked about last time was a super discussion on how can we really systemically change and create more inclusive language. So great discussion in the last one. We also use this session as a chance to talk to you about what's coming up from the Tech Talent Charter. So please feel free, to throw in ideas, but let me give you just a whistle stop tour of, what's coming up in the next few weeks and the next few months for the Tech Talent Charter. So as I said, we have these sessions. They're monthly. I'd love for you to sign up to these more regularly. Thank you for a few of you that I can see showed up for one of the ones last time. We'd love this to become a regular point of your monthly diary. Please invite other people from your team, other people from the Tech Talent Charter to come along wherever they can fit that in. If, as we're talking about things like the open playbook or events, and you're thinking, I didn't even know they did that, or if you're just new to the Tech Talent Charter, or if you have someone on your team that you want to get more involved, but they're just not sure where to start, we have something for that too. So once a month, we have a session called New to the TTC. Karen, he leads that up. It's a chance for you to come along, get that whistle-stop tour of all the things that we do, to ask some questions, be part of that discussion. So those happen monthly. I'd love it if you signed up for that. You should already have in your box, I hope, and of course, most of all of you on the call will already have clicked through and filled it in, but we have put out our annual survey. That's super important to us, okay? Last year's survey gave us a wealth of things that we knew, please do more of because you like it, or do less of, or why aren't we doing this? And a lot of things we have done in this year have been as a result of last year's survey. So this is something that is absolute gold dust for you. We think we've got it perfected. Karen, it takes what, 10 minutes? We agreed we've gone through, if that?
Yeah, if that.
Okay, 10 minutes of your time, really short, sweet, and simple. Have a look at that survey. Please return it to us. It is gold dust, and I really, really appreciate it. Other things to think about. We are kicking off some work. It began back in January. We have said for some time, alternate routes into tech are the way forward in really tipping the balance in getting more inclusive, diverse teams, and really just to fill that talent goal. Now, we know that there are some super programs, whether we're talking about apprenticeships, return to work, career conversion, and the latest boot camps. What we want to understand more and more fully is not what happens on the boot camps, but what happens after. How are companies getting better and better at attracting, recruiting, and even more importantly, onboarding and growing people from these alternate routes? If you're someone who has some expertise in that, we are kicking off some really interesting work, some of our newest TTC labs. Stay tuned on that. If you're interested in that, do let Karen know. That's going to be kicking off, and you'll hear more from that. The other things I say to you more in a whisper, it's not official yet, but we have a hackathon, which is official, of course. It's kicking off next week. One of the themes that we're looking at the hackathon is neurodiversity. This is something you've told us again and again is really important, a real gap in information for you that you want to know more about. So from next week, one of our hackathon topics is going to be about how to build more inclusive cultures for neurodiversity. But then we're going to be doing a series of events over about the next 9 months, really diving into what can we do in relation to neurodiversity. If that's something of interest, do stay tuned. Hackathons, we do have the last of our current hackathon piece. Stay tuned, we'll talk to you about that in a moment. If you're interested in joining a hackathon team, they're starting next week. We still have 1 or 2 places on the teams. If this is something that you're interested in, Karen can put the link in this piece. We will still tell people from the team, but there's more that's coming from that. Finally, as I mentioned, if you weren't able to go to our last working lunch, if you weren't able to tune in to our festival, not to worry. We know that this is important for you to be able to consume things, not always be at the event. So we do have a page where you can download, you can watch our videos from each of the sessions that we did for our festival. We have that for our last working lunch, a really super one on internal cross-skilling. How do we not just train people from outside our organization to get into tech? What could we do internally? But we also know that some of you like podcasts. So Karen's very excited. This is something she's working on behind the scenes. So stay tuned, because what we want to be doing is to launch a whole range of podcasts, nice, short, simple things that you can listen to on all the topics that we've been covering in the past. Okay, so I think that's this is coming. This is my previews at the start of the film, but the main film is coming. We're going to have a discussion now about menopause. Now, if you're already also aware of time, advance warning on these things. We aim and we put this in your diary to last till past, but I know how busy everything is. If we finish early, I'll let you go early and you don't have to tell anyone. Your diary will say you're busy, but if you want to sneak outside to sit in the sun for a second, I won't tell. All right. But I promise you, even if I can't let you go early, by God, you get out of my sessions on time. Okay. Menopause. How about that? So I'm talking to you very much about menopause as a menopausal woman. But if we think about where even the concept and the understanding of menopause has come so far in the last 10 years, it's unbelievable. I remember being in a conversation with my younger sister, and she mentioned perimenopause about 7 years ago, and having say to her, Peri, what? Okay. And I pride myself on being pretty up to date on things, but I had no understanding about perimenopause. I was at an event 3 weeks ago, a real life face-to-face event, and talking to someone on the panel, and she was saying her husband is a head of tech, right, and has been in the business for 20 years. And she mentioned to him about menopause and policies around menopause. And the comment from him was, well, none of my team has ever mentioned it to me, never. So it's not been a problem. It's clearly not been a problem. All right. So moving forward, we know this has been growing as a topic. It has become, whether it's being debated that this is something that should come under as a protected characteristic, or whether this is part of something that is well-being, or, as the way when we've been as Tech Talent Charter as an employee ourselves, I just consider it part of a suite of policies that are around, this is what life is. Okay. This is what happens in life. But as a policy, awareness that companies should have that has been growing. Even a bit of scaremongering where people are saying, actually, you could be liable for not accommodating employees if you don't have something in place. So Karen, you oversee what we have in the playbook. You and I, when we talked about the topic, there's a lot of people if we say that the understanding of what is menopause, what is perimenopause, what is a menopause policy, there's an even bigger gap of information. What are the kinds of things I would expect to see in a menopause policy?
Yeah, I think that we need to consider this as as you would approach other wellbeing policies. So otherwise it can feel that this is a step into the unknown. But we've done these sort of things lots of times before when we look at building policies. And what we want to do is make sure that we're actually addressing the need of the individual. So, and each person's journey and where they sort of sit in that, and how their journey through menopause, how that looks, that there's ways that they can access support and get the right guidance and feel that they can carry on doing their work well. And that's the kind of core function of a policy, that there's a fairness in its approach, and that people know what to expect and how to access that. So people often talk about those more obvious sort of symptoms of menopause, things like hot flushes, making sure there's access to things like fans or adjustable temperatures. But there's lots of other symptoms that I think get less attention, and around things like low mood, loss of confidence, and how you can support people with mentoring, coaching, that angle of things, making sure that they've got space to talk to someone they feel comfortable speaking to in the organisation. And that might not be their manager, they may not feel comfortable that being a male manager, and making sure that there's a pathway for them to find someone that they feel comfortable talking about those things, especially around loss of confidence, because that's a really big piece, isn't it? And how can you advocate for yourself around any of the other needs that you have if you're already having those feelings of loss of confidence? Things like poor concentration can be an issue, and I think making sure that there's a bit of flex there in working day, in task allocation, how they can be buddied and supported within their teams, and anxiety. And we can go, obviously menopause, there's such a big range of symptoms. For some, that goes to the more extreme end, where anxiety, panic attacks can be symptoms of menopause. So most likely you have policies in place for individuals that suffer from anxiety, have panic attacks, and mental health problems. It's joining that up into a wider policy. And
that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, so that people feel like they know and understand what's on offer for them, what can they access, and most importantly, how do I approach this conversation? Who do I need to speak to? Is that my line manager? Is that occupational health? Is that HR? Who do I go to for this kind of support? Is there and can we put things in place that sort of takes the stigma out of it? Because Debbie and I have spoken in the past, it can be a bit of hushed tones, and
we talk about it in a different way. In my mother's generation, it was always talked about the menopause, right? And there was a whole you lowered your voice and you lowered your face because it was that unmentionable. And so I think Karen, I like the way you're demystifying this. And a lot of this, like any of these great policies in inclusive culture, it's normalizing, it's creating safety, it's creating trust, and it's creating structures. Not a perfect, a great policy is not the perfect step by step. It's a framework that individuals can find their way through. What else do we have in the open playbook? So if you're sitting on the call saying, oh, that's great, and you're frantically trying to take things down, we have a section in the playbook, don't we, on menopause? What else do we have in the policy, as well as these, exemplar policy documents?
So I've dropped the link in there to the playbook area so that people can take a look. And this is a growing piece for us. So please do take it as this is our first step into trying to share some of these resources. The CIPD website is brilliant. There's a really nice podcast and some details around approaching policy, and we kind of link to them there. And there's some other kind of reference documents around sort of sample policies and first steps, because I think for many, this is very much the first steps of this process, and we will continue to build that area. So continue to kind of come back to it, because we, as a whole playbook, this is a living, breathing piece, and it develops. It's reactive to what.
And so, if anyone on the call looks through and says, oh my gosh, I can't believe they don't have X, they can just reach out to you to get it in there. So if there's anything that you look through and think, oh my goodness, there's this other awesome thing, please reach out to us to get Karen. Karen will get that in. Everything within the open playbook. If you've not had a look through, please do. But this is a living, breathing document. So in any section, any portion of that playbook, if you think, why don't they have this? We're doing this, or I've come across something. This is how we rely on you. This is a free and open resource that grows and keeps growing because of you. So that's the sort of shout out to you. So thanks, Karen. So what I want to do now is to pivot that, because that's us being able to talk at that theoretical standpoint of this is what good looks like, and this is what's happening, and here's some exemplars. What we like to do is then to try and figure out, what does this look like on the ground? So joining me today, I've got Anne-Marie and Natalie from Codurance, who we know have been doing some great work on that. Now, Anne-Marie, my first question is going to be around, because whenever we get the charter together, I have a lot of what I refer to as size envy, right? Insofar as my smaller companies go, oh, but that's all very well. You don't understand. I'm a tiny company. I don't have a huge HR function that can create these things. But I also have to say, the big companies say, you have no idea how hard it is. You can just wrap your arms around a small company and work that. So there's lots of size envy. But to be clear, Anne-Marie, how big is Codurance? Where are you on the journey in terms of size and growth and that sort of thing?
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. So we're about 140 people at the moment, and that's mostly in the UK, probably about 100 in the UK, and then we have a couple of offices in Spain, and then we're opening one in Portugal in the next few months as well.
Super. So actually, you're at that point that I think is also sometimes quite tricky, which is you're too big to be small, too small to be big. And yet, you've gone through, you've not used that as an excuse. You've really been leaning into policies like this. So talk to me about, how did you at Codurance think about, why did you lean into this policy? Give me the starting point. Why did you start working in this space?
It was two things really. So it was summer last year. We were updating our handbook with other policies, things like our learning and development platform, and like stress and mental well-being, and other things. And so we have an external HR partner who kind of supports us with that, reads through things, and they mentioned a menopause policy. That our contact there was like, oh, some of our companies, our other clients are doing this. So that was one point that kind of the conversation going. And then the other point was that I had recently started doing a CIPD qualification, so which they encourage you to kind of read lots and obviously keep up to date with what's going on. And so I had been reading more about it, so it wasn't a surprise when they mentioned it. And things like, I know we probably all know the stats and that are flying around, but there's things like 6 out of 10 women who are going through the menopause have experienced negative effects, like it's impacted their work negatively, or I think a quarter of women who have been going through the menopause have considered reducing their hours or even giving up work. And it just felt like it kind of will affect half of the population. So it didn't seem, there wasn't really a question. It's like, surely this has to be a policy. But it was just interesting to me, really, that was the first time I'd heard of it. And, I've been working for some years now. So it was interesting.
It is, isn't it? And it, once you start thinking about it, it feels like a no-brainer. How did we not have a policy on that, of something that is going to impact in some way 50% of our workforce, etc. And do remember, anyone who's on the call, if you are working in this space, if you are doing things, do feel free to add questions, or more also to put in what you're doing in this space, so you can join the conversation as we go on. Okay, so you start thinking about, I want to put together a policy. How did you go about? Because a lot of people have been in HR, you have a great idea, and it can crash and burn quite quickly, can't it? So how did you go from, I have a great idea, to this is a real thing at Codurance?
So we were lucky that we had this external HR partner, that they had a template that we could use. But I've looked online and there's loads. Some people, I think you've mentioned on your website, Channel 4 have their policy public. So that would be my point of call if I had to do it again anyway. And I mentioned it to the co-founders of the business. it wasn't even a question of, can we put this policy? It was like, we'd like to put this menopause policy in because it affects so many people in the workforce. And this is what this is the framework. And
these were two women founders? Are these, in going to the founders, who are your founders?
Two men.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, because I want to do some myth busting here in terms of, but it is important, isn't it? Some of us know we're in companies, there are founders and there are founders. What's great is you had founders who already were on the journey on inclusion and doing what's right for people. Not, you weren't starting this in a nasty bro culture, but it is, the first starting point has to be the founders, isn't it? This has to come having the buy-in at the top.
Yeah, and actually I did anticipate some pushback, not because of the policy itself, but more that we've been very much a company of, we're very open, people can have a chat about anything. So I did wonder if they would say, oh, do we need a policy? Because hopefully people would feel comfortable to talk about anything anyway. So more in a positive way, I did expect some kind of questions about it. But once we talked it through and I explained what it was to do, and that it would be really, the purpose of it from my perspective was that it was introducing the topic, and it's raising awareness, it's making sure that we're addressing it, and so there wasn't really any discussion needed about why.
And is your profile across the whole age range, or are you a younger company?
I'd say we're a younger company, yeah.
Okay. And I think that's the other thing to sort of surface for everyone, because sometimes there's that mindset of, do we really need it? We're all 30 somethings. But I think what people need to realize, and that's why it's part of the awareness raising, is don't know how everybody on the call, how much you know about there, but there is this little thing we now understand, which is called perimenopause. And perimenopause can begin affecting women very early, within their 30s. Equally, there are medical reasons why women as early as their teens or 20s can have early onset menopause. So this is something that there are no boundaries in that respect. Okay, so you got buy-in, you start putting it together. What are the key aspects, and what's happened so far? And then we're going to talk to Natalie for a while of how that felt from someone working within the team. So you got the buy-in, you had the template. What did you do next?
So we put that together and then published it on our kind of internal wiki intranet thing, and then published it. And I think Natalie was saying that actually one of the co-founders was the one to kind of flag it on our kind of internal communication on Slack, because as much as I'd like to say, oh, everyone listens to people in different positions, but there's something that's a bit more powerful, I think, when a senior manager or an owner of a company communicates something.
And there's something powerful, isn't it? So yeah, sometimes when we're putting in these policies that feel a little more edgy, it is useful to have a senior voice talking about why this matters to help launch it. I think there's also something powerful when it's launched by a man. Or I've seen equally within companies where there's a senior woman, because it's about normalizing it, isn't it? This is about not othering it, but making this a natural thing. And this is why it matters to all of us. Okay, super. So let's pause there for a second, because I'll come back to how the policy is going. Natalie, before you went to Codurance, you've worked with us. So you're no stranger to inclusion and diversity and championing these things. You're working at Codurance, relatively new. How did this feel from your perspective as it came up on the radar?
Yeah, so I think it was quite powerful, actually. As a sort of late 40s woman, I kind of was aware of menopause, but it wasn't really something I'd kind of researched in detail. I've got friends that are kind of starting to talk about it, but I do remember Mash, our co-founder, who announced it. There was that menopause policy and a few others, and it just felt, I remember being really kind of pleasantly sort of pleased about it. It was just great to see that, particularly I think because it was our sort of male co-founder was sort of saying, I support all these different sort of, we had a number of policies and one was menopause. And I remember actually sort of replying, to the company just to sort of, it was just a really good sort of way of being able to say, thanks for thinking about everybody in our company, particularly, as Anne-Marie mentioned, we're quite a young company. We're kind of, weighted towards, younger men, which is, quite common, I guess, in the industry. So as a sort of slightly more mature woman in our company, definitely in a minority, it was just really nice to know that, as and when I might need some extra support, then it's going to be there. And all the way to sort of the leadership, they're aware that there are lots of different people that have different needs and might require support. So yeah, I know it's only a policy, but it actually means a lot. And I think because it's backed up by a company that has a really good sort of culture around wellbeing, Anne-Marie's worked sort of tirelessly to launch things like a wellbeing platform at Codurance. Obviously, we do the sort of TTC survey every year that we have a lot of buy-in for, and lots of other initiatives. So I think it also helped that whilst we had the policy, I knew that it wasn't just kind of words that would never be sort of implemented. There's lots of evidence of other sort of wellbeing initiatives that have actually sort of been taken on board. So I think the two kind of go hand in hand. It was great to see the policy, but also know that, as a company, as I say, that does look after its people, then it, when it's needed, it's there, to protect me, I guess, and any of my colleagues.
And this is powerful, isn't it? Because we're talking about ingredients of success. So that senior buy-in is really important, but it is that sense of a proven inclusive culture, that people know policies are just the starting point. It's not, one and done and we're through. And I think what's really powerful is your reaction was exactly what Anne-Marie was selling in, which is about inclusive culture. Even if you don't need that policy, that the articulation of that is another way of creating that psychological safety. I belong here. This is a company that wants me here. I can be here. I am included, which I think is really, really possible. Okay, now I'm going to throw it to both of you, and let's talk about what's working, what's not working, where the questions are, etc. Because the policy is never the end of the story. So, I think it's interesting. Natalie, you mentioned when it was announced, you guys actually have a channel for this, don't you? So there's this discussion, this ongoing discussion, which is really hard when you talk about virtual partners and different offices and everything else. So talk to me about that channel in which that was communicated.
So we, I don't know if everybody here uses Slack, probably, or maybe Teams. So we have our kind of general channel. So I think it was announced on general so that everybody would see it. But then we have a sub channel around diversity, and we've got this really, really kind of very engaged. Lots of people share kind of, thoughts, initiatives, ideas, etc. So yeah, on an ongoing basis, we continue to discuss things. And that's, one way of being able to make sure that things don't just kind of get sort of forgotten, that we, as a team, we have a group of us that meet regularly, and then we include our leadership team, talking about, all sorts of, ideas and initiatives to make sure that we're continually supporting both our own people, but also the wider sort of tech community.
And I really liked it when you talked about that, because there's two parts of it. One, I like that it was announced on the general thing, because this is for everyone. But I like the way in which you've created that ongoing channel. I know a lot of companies have employee resource groups, or groups that are supporting in some way either the whole of inclusion and diversity or specific lenses. But I like how some companies are developing, and how is there a regular informal channel that anyone can listen and be part of, that creates that sense that that in a virtual world, in a hybrid working space, creates that ongoing conversation that is really, really powerful to go through. I mean, Anne-Marie, how do you feel in the policy? What are the bits that you think have gone really well? What are you still tinkering with or worrying about on thinking about where the policy is going?
I think the policy itself is fine how it is, in the sense that we're raising awareness. We kind of explain a bit about what the menopause is, and make it clear that it's not just about the people that go through it, but it's also about the people who are managing employees, and so it's both sides. I think probably it's just following on from that, really. And something we do at the moment is, if you were to ask me who do I think would talk to who about it, if someone was going through perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, I'd hope that they would speak to their manager. But if they didn't, well, I feel like we're small enough where we have women in senior management or like HR people in the respective countries, and anyone would feel comfortable to come and speak to us. But I think that's not probably sustainable as we get bigger, and we've never really been like that as a company. We've never been that you have to escalate or go to someone senior. We do want the managers to be comfortable in managing these conversations. But I think that's something that we'd have to work on next.
And I think with anything that when we're talking about DEI, we hear again and again, once a policy launches, it's that training and support for the people who implement it, the middle managers, the HR people, etc. And in smaller companies, that can come down, that can revert back to you. But as you say, that's not scalable, and that's higher risk. It's creating the training and support to get everyone comfortable and to raise awareness, knowledge, and skill in being inclusive. And I think, we often talk about in a negative way, middle management, that's where it always breaks. You get your senior buy-in, you get your employee resource groups, and it always breaks at the middle management. But actually, let's flip it on its head. It's because we often forget that we need to train and support our middle managers. Most people got to be middle managers because they had a skill in tech, not because they had a skill in being great people managers. And the space is moving. This is an ever moving space. So our training and our support of our middle managers, every time I hear about any great policy in terms of inclusion, it hangs or it flies on its middle management, and that's a training thing. So I like that you're looking at informally, you've already done that spot check. Can everyone easily access someone? But the next step is starting to think about, but how do we raise the awareness? How do we include those sorts of things? Now, I'm hearing one of the questions from the audience was saying, did the women's health in general come into question? When you were putting together the menopause policy, and you said both in terms of forming the policy, your senior team, also Natalie, the way the team talked about it, did women's health in general come up? Because, menopause is not the only time that biochemically we have challenges. Were other things coming up for you both?
Do you mean things like pregnancy,
periods, miscarriage?
Like,
let's think about the whole gamut of the joys of being a woman.
Yeah, we had enhanced our maternity pay and leave, so that had been one of the things that we'd implemented in the summer, which at the same time. Honestly, no. Other than that, we hadn't talked about other policies or things like that. But I think as we're learning, there's loads more things to do, and I think this was kind of our mini win internally. I mean, amongst say me and Natalie, that we were like, great, we've put this together now. But yeah, I think it's a good question, because it doesn't just stop there. It's not like we're women until menopause and then that's it, that's the only thing. So,
and it's all smooth sailing until menopause, it's just a bundle of laughs being a woman in the workplace. So it's really important to try and think through, and it's about starting the conversations. We don't need to policy to death the space. What we need to do is to create those conversations and those sorts of things, because I've heard from companies where they are starting to look at that. It starts having people to feel more comfortable to say, but actually, I have endometriosis that has huge impacts on my work-life balance. I have real problems with, so there's, and it's not just women, this whole thing starts bringing up things like chronic illness, it's bringing in other health complications, etc., which all go back to trying to create a culture where we support. And I think it's about core principles that you supplement with policies. And Natalie, you talked about, this reinforced from your perspective, this is a place where I can go and talk, and an employer understands that I need to, that there are different accommodations that people need at different stages of life.
Yeah, I think also, whilst we perhaps, menopause is one of the, I think we've got policies, as Anne-Marie said, around sort of, maternity and menopause now. And obviously there are lots of other areas of female health that are also really important. We do have a lot of content that we share regularly just around general kind of well-being and mental health and support, and that there is a lot in our handbook and also on our wiki really about how Codurance, as a business, whatever you might be going through in your life, we are here to help and support and be as flexible as possible, whatever that might look like. So I think even because everyone is unique, and I think if that there is a lot of sort of talk on in the guidance as well about that. I think so kind of you obviously can't cover everything, but there is that general theme of flexibility and support, and making sure that people work obviously is important, but ultimately people's well-being is probably the number one priority. But I think particularly since COVID, and our business has changed the way we work completely. Sort of pre-pandemic, everybody was going into offices supporting our customers, and now more or less everybody is working remotely most of the time, and that brings its own sort of challenges and support needs, I would think.
I agree. Now, I've got two more super questions coming in from Silke that I'm going to throw to on, but I wanted to do a quick check with the audience. Can I ask everyone to give me let's look at, throw something in the messages, please. Could everyone chat in here? How many of you, tell me if you have a policy, so you either put thinking, we're trying to do one, or no, because you're at that stage of actually we're coming here. So I have a thinking. So if everyone can throw through, so lots of thinkings, a few no's. Okay, super. I'm hearing from several of you. Thank you. While that's coming through, is there anyone else on the call who has a policy? So Claire, you're saying that you're raising awareness. Is there anyone else? So Silke, you've got something through draft. So I might pull you in, Silke. You may regret throwing that into the conversation. I might ask you to come through, come onto the call, maybe even come on camera. You don't have to, Silke, and you can kill me later for just dropping you through in that respect. So let's go back to the interesting questions in that respect. What about reviewing, and what about data? So Anne-Marie, on the one hand, you're a smaller company, so let's be interested on how you're looking data and bringing in data within the organization to help on this. But first of all, review. I mean, how often are you going to be reviewing and amending this policy?
I think with all policies in the handbook, we should be reviewing it at least annually, or sometimes if something comes up like about learning and development, we were like, oh, we don't have a policy, let's put it in, but then we kind of check in on that platform every 6 months. So I'd assume we should be looking at that every 6 months. So yes, I don't have a written commitment to review the policy annually, but I would expect that we will do that.
And I think with smaller companies, there is that you are to some degree scrambling, aren't you, to what do we have, what do we not have? And I mean, I say that because remember, as Tech Talent Charter, we went from me on the hamster wheel behind the curtain to growing, and as we get bigger, we've been putting together policies, and there's always that, yes, you're going to review, but you're also just trying to figure out what's missing. So it's that balancing act between the two. Data, do you think you're going to gather any kind of data around that? And what might you do in terms of data?
Actually, sorry, Debbie, just quickly about the review of the policy. Natalie messaged me the other day about the policy because she'd read something about, we hadn't actually specified when the menopause officially starts, like, or when it's determined to have started. So we just added that in. So I think, as much as there's a commitment to review it, I also think it's just throughout. Like if someone messaged me and said, I read this thing, or about adding some information, then we would just do it at the time. We kind of worked.
And that's kind of where you want policies to be. When you're trying to build policies on inclusion should mean that it's quite responsive to people in the piece, etc. And so that's super that it's moving through, and I think it will continue to, because the awareness, public awareness, we saw the thing with Davina McCall and all of the awareness is coming through. We know it's been going through House of Commons, and the science continues moving on. Before we were chatting before the call, weren't we? I heard a super TED talk about some of the brain science that's going on around brain fog and all that sort of thing. If anyone's on the call and doing the bit of, I don't want to talk about brain fog because it limits us as a woman or it hurts our case, I'll try and get the link and I'll share it with Karen to go in the playbook. Super playbook that shows actually women are working actually more efficiently, because cognitively we are just as sharp. We just have to work harder to get there. Silke, thank you for coming on to the piece. And this is completely unprompted, so you can just give me a no comment. Talk to me about, to what degree is your journey similar to what's happening at Codurance, and what is it, and how is it different?
Really similar to what's happened at Codurance there. I can resonate with a lot of what Anne-Marie was talking about there, in terms of getting the buy-in, where it's come from. The only difference was it didn't come from our HR. It came from the Women's Network. And I think that is a natural place where these things do tend to happen. We have a very active women's network in the UK, and then we ask questions within our corporate, because we're part of a larger organisation across multiple countries, to see if they had a menopause policy. And again, it was all, oh, well, we've kind of thought about it, but we don't have it in place. And it was that same old, we were like, right, well, we're not going to wait for something to come from the mothership. We're going to look at doing something ourselves. Plus, obviously, with a lot of countries, we have different operating legislative regulations. So we need a policy that works for us in the UK as well. So it was more a grassroots movement that we need this. This is why we need it. And within my role as a social value manager, I have access to the data as well. So that was really key in supporting why the time is now, because we were able to look at breakdown by of our females and say, well, actually, do you realize that 2/3 of the women in the UK business are actually at a stage in their career where they're either thinking about menopause or they're going through menopause? And that is a really high statistic then to turn around and say to the business, you can't actually afford to ignore this, that we need to do something about this. And when we're talking, especially during the pandemic, where we have a lot more focus on retention programs and promotion programs, that this actually becomes part of the bigger conversation, and it's not a standalone thing that is kind of, oh, well, it'll be nice to have, but it's how we've ingrained that then into the bigger picture conversations and the business strategy. And focus, and that's what's got the buy-in of leadership and HR to then work with the Women's Network to craft that policy. And when we were starting to do that, we were really fortunate, because one of our clients is Scottish Government, and they actually were one of the first to release a menopause policy. So we just went to them and to their Women's Network and said, lovely, we're looking at doing this, can you help us? And they were brilliant. They were like, sure. We had an internal session with them, you know, really frank, honest conversation of where the pitfalls were and where the hardships were and where they got it wrong and where they got it right. And we learned from their policy. They shared it with us. It's publicly available. And we said, okay, well, this is a good starting point. And what Anne-Marie was saying, you know, there's so many now policies that are publicly available that you're not starting with a blank paper.
Which is huge.
But the minute we did start doing it, the conversation from the senior leadership turned into bigger than just menopause, about women's health in general. And we were like, well, hang on a minute, because that is big, that's huge. And people started reviewing our maternity and paternity leave, and started reviewing sort of policies around adoption, parental leave, miscarriage, all of these areas. And we were like, this is huge. And we felt like we were opening up a can of worms. And we were like, well, we just want a menopause. In all fairness. Can we not just do that? And then look at all this other stuff, which is very important as well, but later. So what we've agreed to do is, behind the scenes, a women's health policy in general is being created, which requires more consensus, more buy-in, more inputs. But we're doing it in strands so that the is out there first, and the comms around that. Because in the Women's Network, like Anne-Marie, we have a working group who meet regularly, who talk about menopause. We are at the beginning of our journey. We only just kicked it off at the beginning of this year. We've got some calendar events in the diary coming into the back end of the year, especially looking around International Menopause Day as that marker. But what we're really looking at doing is getting our managers on board, who are predominantly male. And that's the hard bit, because if they're not buying into what we're saying and all this great training and access to resource, then the females it's not trickling down. That is not getting down there. And they're not getting access to the information and what they're entitled to and what can be done and what support is available in the business. If you've got a manager who's just la 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 la, it's really hard. So next week we've got a mandatory managers training, and it's recorded for those that do have an excuse not to be there. So
lovely. And this is the
no
size challenges.
excuse, right?
Yeah, but this
Yeah.
is, and I think this is why it's important for us to have these discussions, because there is not a one size fits all approach to this sort of thing, and what will work in a smaller company and what has to happen in a bigger company has to really be thought through, and you have to think through the context. So, and I think, you know, this is what's so important. But I'm hearing the key things. Tell me, you know, I'm looking to the three of you, and anyone else can shout in. But it is that first bit of, once the concept comes through, it's awareness raising and business case. And Anne-Marie, you could put together something relatively simple, couldn't you, on a few stats, because you had some willing senior managers. The bigger the company and the more challenging the senior company, the more sophisticated that business case needs to be. And Silke, I love the idea of doing your age profile, looking at the science and talking about. And I think, you know, you were able to, Anne-Marie, because you're that fast growing company and the founders get it. There's always that implicit, of course, we want to retain people. Whereas Silke, you had to be very explicit. And this is where the great talent gap for tech is our greatest ally in all this piece, because you're saying we will lose people. We will not attract people. This is pounds and pence gain or loss in terms of putting that together. So the policy coming together, I'm hearing from both of you, you know, for goodness sake, don't reinvent the wheel. It's about, you know, get something off the shelf. We'll gather as many as we can in our open playbook to share, but it's then about customizing for yours. And that's making sure it makes sense for the context for you, Anne-Marie, in terms of how you do things at Codurance. You know, Silke, you have to also then look at what's the national context. You know, what can we draw on that makes it easier? What are the things that we have that are more challenging? And then it's either in a smaller company where you can develop that informal network of support and middle managers who can help make sure the implementation's effective, or Silke, you know, the bigger the company, the more you do have to think through, how are we making sure it works in practice, and the training and support around that piece. Where, you know, but Anne-Marie, you and I were talking on the call, weren't we, of in some ways it's useful because at least, you know, worst case always it comes back to you, but you know there is going to be a training piece. Because all of us, I mean, I'd say myself as a menopausal woman who works in this space, I'm learning what it means. How do we do it? And then the other thing I think is understanding, then there is this much bigger piece on women's health. And being inclusive, we need to think about, there's a bigger issue around trans health, and there's a thing around men's health that we need to think about. That is that piece, but we just know that more often male health is a more understood and well-trod space, whereas for women's health, for trans health, there are other issues that we need to think about. But it is then understanding, it is opening a can of worms, but it's a can of worms we've got to make our way through, because these are very real issues that are forming barriers to people to feel included, to be in the workplace, and to be their best in the workplace. I mean, are there any other questions coming up or comments from the audience? Please don't feel that you have to be an expert or have a policy in place, that you can ask questions or that you can share things in. I promise I won't put you quite the spotlight that I did on Silke. I know Silke, so I know that I could do that. But if anyone else has comments or questions, when you're raising awareness, Claire, I hope you don't mind if I'm asking, how is that going in raising the awareness? Is that getting traction? Is that struggling?
I'll just come in, quickly. So we kicked it off with International Menopause Day then last October. So I had done stuff at a previous organisation, and previous organisation we worked with an external company called Henpicked, and that might be familiar to some of you, And we did some work with them, and they created a policy for us and a lot of collateral that we could use internally. It was one of the most interacted with piece of content that we did at that previous organisation. Only seconded to the interaction when we changed our CEO. That was how big it was in terms of how people connected with it. And where I'm at now, we've just started to do some pieces around trying to raise awareness. We almost have a policy of not having policies. We try to stick with kind of guidance and support rather than having sort of things that are set in stone or written in stone. So we are unlikely, I think, to have a policy around this, because we just, that's not our approach. But to continually try and raise awareness, our comms methodology as well at the minute is not as great as something like you mentioned, Slack and and having a whole company portal that people can interact with. That's about to come for us. We're just piloting it now. So I think once we've got better platforms that we can post some of that stuff on, then that will again get a bit more traction. But
it's creating the conversation, isn't it? And I think if we hear about what everyone's talking about, success or failure, but what really helps drive this is the policy starts the conversation, and the conversation is where action comes, which I think is really, really powerful.
And we've also done, because for our customers externally, so we have a learning management system and content that we sell. As part of that, we've created a menopause like e-learning, just a small e-learning that again we've kind of pushed out internally to say, go and have a look at that. It's only a sort of a bite size, I think it's about 20-30 minutes that we've just promoted. So again, it is having that conversation, as you say, rather than forcing anything. It is definitely out.
Okay, we're nearly to the end. If I don't have any other burning comments from people who have spoken or haven't spoken, or any other questions, this is your sort of last chance to throw that into chat. Otherwise, I'm going to let you have a sneaky 5 minutes to go out and sit in the sun for a second. We won't tell anyone, all right? You just keep it on the diary and just talk about, my God, they took us, they just went for so long, what could I possibly do? Or you can hide here in your room. If you have kids or a boss or something, and actually just staying alone in your office by yourself works for you, whatever works. We remember this is an ongoing conversation. If you're in the call and you come across something that would be valuable for us to put into the playbook, please share that. And, do keep this conversation going. If, as we've been going through this, you're thinking, I'd love to join one of these sessions and talk about what we're doing in the company, please let us know. If you've got something that you wish, you don't want to talk about it, but you certainly want to listen to it, please let us know. We hope that you join us again. I hope that you found that part really valuable. Karen is going to send a link where it's really quick. It's not even the 10 minutes of our survey. This is just a super smiley face, happy face, unhappy face on how the session was that we'd love to have from you. I hope to see you again. Listen, Anne-Marie, Natalie, thank you. Silke, Claire, thank you for letting me just suddenly shine the spotlight on you. Thanks for taking part. This is part of the journey. Really love hearing from all of you. Great. And I hope I see you again. Have a lovely time and go get some sunshine. Go get it for vitamin D, health purposes only. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.